Well, welcome, folks. I'm going to go ahead and do a short intro, some housekeeping, and then I'm going to turn it over to our folks at Firefly Partners. So thank you, first and foremost, for joining us today. We are always thrilled to see folks in the waiting room and to bring these webinars to you and this content to you around digital fundraising strategy. A couple of housekeeping notes. If you haven't seen yet, we do have a full page of webinars listed for the remainder of the year. You can find that in the nonprofit resources, and there's also some other nonprofit resources that might be very valuable to you, including past webinar recordings. I'll also mention that the first half of our Colorado Gives Day toolkit has been released, and so you can find that there on the nonprofit resources page as well. If you know any nonprofits that maybe aren't yet on Colorado Gives, enrollment is open. That's also something that you can find on that nonprofit resources page. All right. Those are my couple of announcements. Let's get into the webinar. So for today, we are joined by Firefly Partners, and we are so excited to invite them. This is part one of a three-part series. So this content is going to build on next month's and the month following to really take you through an interactive experience in how to cultivate and engage with your donors. So very excited to bring this information and content to our nonprofit audience. For today's webinar, we want this to be really interactive. So submit your questions in the chat. We'd like to answer them as we go. I know typically we hold it to the end, but this is discussion based. So feel comfortable in submitting your questions via chat, and as they come along, we'll go ahead and answer them. All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our friends at Firefly Partners so they can introduce themselves and get us started. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Jordan. Good morning, all. My name is Ali Schilling. I'm a senior digital strategist here at Firefly Partners, and I'm really excited to partner with the Colorado Gives Foundation to bring you this webinar today. As Jordan mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You'll be able to see the deck. We will share this out following today's call, but really want to ensure that we encourage participation here. You know, there's no question that cannot be answered by us. There's no silly questions. Really want to ensure we are walking away from this presentation today with, an understanding of who are you talking to, the audiences that your organization serves, and how the donor journey relates to being able to achieve success for your goals. Want to ensure that we're talking about and addressing specific pain points for your organization through some of this work as well. So again, please feel free to ask questions. There's going to be interaction. I'd love to be able to hear from you all as we're kind of going through this presentation to really ensure that you're walking away with some valuable content today. So just a quick overview in terms of what we're going to be covering. We're going to be talking about understanding your audience at large. We're going to be talking about the donor pathway and its application, how to maximize retention, engagement, and growing your donor base. So, we're thinking about who is your audience, but then when you find out, really the folks that you're serving and how you can reach them, kind of steps to be able to do that. We'll be talking about some key takeaways, which will help us in terms of Colorado Gives Day. And then, as mentioned, we'll do question and answer throughout, but we'll also do a Q&A at the end as well and kind of open it up for some more conversation. So diving in today, understanding your audience, it can sound like a really daunting exercise for organizations, no matter if you have a team of 1 or a team of 10. It's really important to start to think about who these folks are, how this is really important in terms of achieving success for your organization and your mission, and then thinking about, why it's important, how it's important. The who is really important too, and then how it all really fits together and folds into your fundraising strategy. So why understanding your audience matters. First and foremost, being able to know who you serve helps you accomplish your goals. And thinking about, planning for a year long, what are your goals, fiscally, and also what you're trying to achieve along the way. it's really important to know who you're talking to, and how you can start to then really define your target audiences, know what they want, because when you start to give them the type of content they want, the messaging that they're looking for, they're more inclined to engage, whether that means giving a gift, or that means filling out a survey and really starting to see success, so that you can be strategic in the communications that you put out, but also have the opportunity to think about how to keep them long term with your organization, and retaining them year over year so that they're coming back and giving more. So what's really important here is, in order to get someone's attention, you have to give them the kind of content they want. But in order to give them what they want, you need to really get to know them better. So the first step really along the line is understanding your audience and defining the who. So I'd love to hear, if anyone has, any idea around what questions you can ask to get to know your audience better. I'd love to see some people pop in the chat with some types of questions that you would typically ask to really get to know your audience. Or if you don't know, that's completely fine too. It's something we'll cover, but I'd love to see, as we're starting to think about, understanding and defining the who, what do you typically ask to get to know those individuals? How did you hear about our organization? That's great. That's really important question. Yep. When was the last time you engaged with us? That's fantastic. Yep. Those are all really important questions and steps along the line. What are you passionate about? I love that. That's so great. What do you want to learn? That's all of these are really important in terms of being able to understand your who. Because some questions, as you're sitting down as an organization and thinking about defining your audience, you want to think about, who are you speaking to? Are you talking directly to donors? Are you talking to volunteers? Are you thinking about speaking to community members or corporate sponsors? All of these, different audience subsets are potential donors to your organization, whether they are an actual donor already or a prospect. It's really important to think about who, in terms of the individual. It's also important to start to dive into thinking about demographics. Are you speaking to an older audience or a younger audience? Because you'll start to understand that the way that you'll develop your strategy for communications is important to really understand. If you're speaking to a younger demographic, what do they want? How are they digesting the information you're sharing? Are they, the younger demographic tends to look at their phone more. So if they're reading emails or looking at your social channels on their cell phone, it's a different experience than folks who are joining via desktop and having that same experience and looking at that messaging. And you'll want to be sure to kind of think about adapting based on that. You'll also want to look at, what are their needs? And I thought that was some questions that came up in the chat. Really important. Is someone looking to get involved? Or someone looking more to learn about the services that your organization provides? And then how are you able to think about tailoring the experience based on that? What motivates an individual? Do they want to make an impact? Do they have a desire to align with an organization whose mission they have an affinity for? All of these are really critical questions as you're starting to understand who these folks are in your donor base, whether it's 100, 1,000, or more. Being able to know the makeup of your audience is critical to achieving success. What's also really important to think about is, where are they? Are your donors online? Do you have more folks engaging via email and social media? Or there are also a lot of foundations that have most of their donor base offline. And so how are you crafting and creating plans where you'll be able to achieve success, knowing where these folks kind of receive their information? Also thinking about, where are they located geographically? Are they local to where your organization is based, or are they coming from all across the nation? And then the last question, which I know is came up a bit in the chat too, is what do you want your audience to do? So you know you have all this information, it's great, but what is that call to action? Are you looking for folks to sign up for email? Are you looking for them to partake in a service that's offered, make a donation, or attend an event? And it also can be all of these things. So I think that's really important for folks to know is not, it just doesn't have to be one, but it can be multiple things. But just being able to really understand these type of questions will really help drive success in the long run. And so the next slide here, I'd love to encourage some participation. This is an example of the Lymphoma Research Foundation's homepage. And so I want to start to dive into, we've thought about the different questions we ask, but I think what's important to really start to realize is that an organization can serve more than one type of audience. And also the potential audiences you can reach as donors doesn't have to be narrow. And so it's really thinking about, how can we broaden the scope of, and where does our organization fit in needs for multiple subsets of individuals? So love to take a look at this website and, ask you guys to think about who are the potential audiences here, just based on looking at the Lymphoma Research Foundation's homepage. Who do they serve as an organization that we can think about ultimately, if they're not already donors, to convert them to donors? And Jordan also dropped in the link as well in the chat. So if you want to click on, please feel free to do so. But I'd love to get some feedback here. Family members, yes. That is a really big one. People with lymphoma, serving women. Researchers, yes. Not Jeanette, that's correct. Yep, you're also thinking about researchers and healthcare professionals. That's another potential audience for this organization and being able to expand their reach. People with diverse backgrounds, exactly, underserved populations. Great question, Amanda. How do I identify the audiences we might be overlooking? I think that's really important. In the next slide, we're actually going to get into a little bit more of who you can look at as potential audiences. Because I think if, even if your organization is really sector specific and you might be looking at, right, lymphoma. Well, lymphoma isn't going to touch everyone, but you want to think about there's not just board members who are the potential people you can reach out to solicit for dollars because they have the strongest attachment and affinity to your organization, but casting that net a little bit wider. So getting into this next slide here, who exactly are your audience members? There's many that you can look at. What I think is really important here is more than a few people, but being able to start to identify some target markets in which you can think about reaching out to and building awareness, and being able to focus on, if you provide a service to the community, who are your current and prospective participants? Ultimately, the goal is you want someone to get involved, build that relationship with your organization, and then they'll ultimately be able in the long run to be considered as a potential donor or bring other donors based on the experience and the positive feedback they've had with your organization to your organization. There are also a number of people interested in the sector. So I think that it's important to look at not just a very localized group of folks, but expanding beyond across the nation. What other organizations are similar to yours in mission? And how are you thinking about, if you focus specifically on giving back in the community, there are other folks who have an affinity for giving back in the community and starting to expand upon that. Also, you have community and government partners, and then board members. So starting to think about building relationships with community partners, establishing those, because you're not just looking at your singular donors, but you've got corporate and foundation relationships that you can establish, and those are great potential prospects to become donors to your organization. You obviously have the people who have already donated, whether they're active and currently donating year over year, and that's ultimately the goal, is fantastic. But there's also an opportunity to think about who's in your database. And if these individuals have lapsed after 2 years and they haven't engaged with your organization, what can you do to recognize what their needs might be, how you can ultimately reach them, and then bring them back into the fold? There's a lot of opportunity thinking about folks who have had a relationship in the past with your organization and how to be able to bring them back into the fold because the affinity for your mission already exists. For organizations who have volunteers, this is a great opportunity to think about how to engage your volunteer network and being able to strengthen the relationship with them. And then again, local and corporate sponsors, and thinking about, what organizations want to help your mission succeed. Savannah has a great question. Should we be targeting all areas of our audience members? The ultimate goal is yes, you want to be able to reach them, but you don't necessarily want to reach them in the same way. And so later in the slide deck here, we'll talk about how to start to understand that all these folks may be target markets for donors for you, but they're all not going to have the same needs, the same wants, the same desires. And they will each have their own different challenges or barriers to feel like they, may not give. And so being able to kind of take some steps to recognize that you may have 500 different donors in your database, but you may have 100 of them who currently are receiving services from your organization. And you may have 100 other who just have an affinity for your mission. So how can you start to take about the information you have about these folks and create a customized journey for them ultimately, so that you know what to do with them when they come into your organization? So I want to talk a little bit about the donor pathway. And so it's really important to understand the journey that a donor takes through your organization. So now you have ultimately the information about who your target markets are, but everyone, kind of comes in the same journey ultimately. So before someone's a donor, they're a prospect to your organization. And ultimately, they'll follow the donor pathway. And this will help you better understand the steps that they take to conversion and the steps that you can help assist them on to conversion as well. So, first and foremost, you're thinking about attracting folks to your organization. Then you want to take the steps to acquire them. Then you want to think about, how are you nurturing these folks? You're building those relationships, making them feel primed, like they're ready to give a gift. And then ultimately they make their gift. And then the goal is to keep them long term. And you can, after you start to understand who these folks are, what their affinity is to your mission, and we're going to go through a number of different activities that you can do to be able to really see how to translate that into some impact and action oriented items so that you can retain them long term, year over year. That's really important. But also, you want to continue to cultivate them and steward them. And that's really important in terms of being able to keep them as a donor for your organization long term. So I know that we talk about the donor pathway, but what do these actually mean? There's a lot of words here, but you may not necessarily know what each step of the donor pathway means. So we'll go through these quickly, and then I'm actually going to give an example as it pertains to Colorado Gives Day. so you can understand how you're bringing potential audience members into the fold. And then once they're there, what are you able to do with them? So in the donor pathway attract is really raising awareness to attract new prospects. You're trying to get someone to know about your organization. Acquire, you want to gain their interest. You want to get them to start to maybe sign up for an email newsletter or follow you on social media. And you want to think about nurturing that relationship. And for folks who come in and they just sign up and they're part of your emails as a non-donor, how are you thinking about creating and building a strong relationship with them so that you do get them to secure their investment and become a donor? And then as we talked about, we want to retain them. So we're thinking about nurturing that relationship as well and ultimately cultivate them so that we can maximize giving year over year. So an example for Colorado Gives Day along the pathway. So you want to think about, what are the steps that someone ultimately will take to be part of your organization? And so first and foremost, the prospect would see a result for Colorado Gives. And then to acquire them, they sign up for a newsletter and they see valuable content on social media. We start to send them emails with information about Colorado Gives Day and advocacy opportunities that are important to them. Then we ultimately think about the fact that they've seen all this information and now they're ready to commit on Colorado Gives Day. They're ready to participate. Then ultimately the goal is after Colorado Gives Day passes, you want to continue to retain them as a donor for your organization. So you share the value in the impact of one's contribution, and they really start to feel like their gift makes a difference. And ultimately throughout the year, then you start to cultivate them and you send targeted messages about the impact of giving and the needs facing those served by your organization so that they're ultimately primed to make another gift and hopefully become a monthly supporter. And that's really important. So you can, as an organization, start to really think about and create examples of pathways that folks take into your organization. Are you sending out email newsletters? Are you doing paid advertising or just organic posting on social media? Those are all opportunities for folks to become a donor for your organization. And now I think what's really important is your audience, right? The target members you may be able to reach. How do you use this information to actually take the next step? And I want you to know that there is no organization that is too small or too sector specific to be able to do this work. You can be a team of one and be able to do this at scale. So everything doesn't have to be done, to the maximum that a team of say 50 may be able to do, but you can start to create and carve out specific activities that will really help you understand your audience and ultimately then create a more successful fundraising strategy. So there's a couple of activities here that are ways that you can start to get to know your audience. And there's quantitative and there's both qualitative ways. But first and foremost, you can ask your audience members directly by deploying a survey. This can be a survey via email. This can be a survey on social media. It can also be a survey via phone. If you have a relationship with donors that exists more on the phone, you can use that as an opportunity to continue the conversation. Why are you interested in our organization? What motivated you to make a gift? And also learn more about their interests specifically so that you can use that to your advantage when you're thinking about planning campaigns in the future or curating content that you may want to send out. That goes back to what we spoke about at the beginning is in order to give your audience what they want, you have to know what they're looking for. Another great way to do it is to analyze your website traffic. Look at who's coming to your website. Where are they located? What are some of the most popular pages that are visited by folks in those topics? That really starts to give you an idea of what folks are looking for from your organization. And again, how you can craft and create plans that share the information that you know people are looking for. And another activity is working on creating in-depth personas for your current and desired audiences. So starting to think about say you have three main groups of folks. You've got folks who are, at a $1 to $500 level, and you consider those your mid-level donors. What are kind of some commonalities in their patterns of giving and their needs and their wants, and then opportunities that you can take knowing this information to start to create specific messaging and customized segments for these individuals. And you could do the same thing with folks who are non-donors. And going back to the Lymphoma Research Foundation website, you can think about creating persona for a researcher, because their interest in your organization is ultimately going to be different than someone who may be just an event participant. So really being able to start to look at some common threads that you have within your data around donors will help you to really better understand your audience. And we included a couple resources on this slide as well. So you'll be able to take a look at actually how to do some of this work. And these resources help lay it out step by step. Exactly. Adding custom questions such as a phone number to your donation checkout flow. That's a great option. If it's important for your organization, think about the steps in collecting the information that you need, and then give the individuals the opportunity to be able to actually provide it. For Colorado Gives Day as a monthly giving / sustainer, yes, that's really important. As Jordan mentioned, they'll be incentivizing recurring gifts. And we'll actually talk about in the second webinar a sustaining program and those folks who give month over month, and how can you really build a strong program there. But I think what's really important to think about is there's really an opportunity to start to understand each subset of audience members for your organization, and it will really help with your fundraising strategy throughout the year. I've got a couple examples here that I definitely think are really important to share. And like I said, welcome any questions that you have as we go through these. So I'll kind of take these a bit slower to ensure that everyone has a chance to look at this. This is an example of a welcome series. So for folks who have just joined as a donor to an organization, what does their journey look like? And for this organization, they have a welcome series. So they have 3 emails that have the ability to start to cultivate and steward these new donors to their organization. This one has a survey. So they ask folks to tell them what their organization means to them and why supporting the mission is so important. This goes back to asking directly, getting the information from your donors is a great way to start to better understand them, because it gives them the opportunity to create a feedback loop with your organization. And it also creates the opportunity to build the relationship. They feel like they're being heard. And that is important for a lot of folks in terms of being able to feel compelled to give to an organization. So folks here have the opportunity to partake in a survey and tell them about why they gave a gift, what's important to them in terms of cause, and really any impact that the organization has had on someone. And this is a great opportunity to get to know your audience members better, start to, again, think about how you're creating segments of folks that you're able to communicate with, and then what you can ultimately do to create a stronger relationship with them in the long run. So this is an example that includes different ways to learn more about the organization and get involved. So another example here is it's great to not solicit someone for a gift right away. So you're building the relationship beyond soliciting someone for more money. And that's really important in terms of your audience. Another example is looking at data. So this is an example of the back end of Google Analytics, but whichever platform you use will provide at least some variation of some of this data. And there's many different pages to look at, but you can look broadly and overview and start to pull out trends. You'll start to realize where, in the world are people coming to your website and taking a look at, what gender, do we have looking, what are their interests, where are they coming from and how long are they staying? And ultimately their age is really important too. So this looking at the data really helps start to define some of the information, even that we talked about with what kind of questions do you ask to better understand your audience. Thinking about that older versus younger demographic is important, or where they're coming from geographically, and being able to really look at the data. You can also, as we just mentioned on the other earlier slide, looking at the data around what pages are visited, what are these folks actually interested about, and what's performing really well will ultimately help you be able to create some really strong campaigns in the future. And this is an example of a persona that was done for new donors for an organization. And I know personas can sound really daunting. We shared a link to kind of learn more about them, but this is that opportunity to really start to create segments for your audience and better understand them so that you can work on utilizing these in the future. And the way you can start with this is having conversations internally with your different stakeholders, starting to understand everyone has heard something, received bits of information, heard, talked about challenges. We talk about pain points. Even organizations have pain points in reaching out to folks at different levels. You can start to solicit some of your donors and ask them questions. That goes back to some of the survey work. This can layer into it, but you can also do it over the phone as well. And you want to start to think about goals that a new donor has. Specifically in this example. So if someone came to your organization and gave a gift one time, what are some of the goals that they had in doing that? So why are they making a gift? What is their motivation to give? You also want to think about the challenges. So do they not know about all the services you offer? That's something that you'll want to think about in terms of then turning it into the opportunity at the bottom. Do they feel like their voice is unheard? Do they have, like example here, no option to adjust email preferences? And then being able to actually use this information to craft and create your annual fundraising plan and some of the foundational elements that are centered around that, to be able to make sure that folks are feeling heard and being able to curate an experience in the way in which they want to. So now that we've kind of talked about some different ways and actions in which you could take to really help you understand your audience, now okay, we've got 5 different groups of folks based on the work that we've done that are really our target audiences. How can we use this to our benefit year round and beyond is really important. And there's different ways that you can move the needle. And the ultimate goal is using the knowledge that you've gained to be able to create and craft a customized experience for your users and your donors. One way to do this is refine your segmentation on the back end, being able to create specific segments for your non-donors, your one-time donors, tribute donors. You may have high dollar donors or monthly donors. And what's really important about that is these folks have all given a gift, and that's common, but their motivations to continue to give, their goals are all different. Think about a non-donor. The goal is to get them to give their first gift. So you'll want to be communicating with them in some way. But for someone like your monthly donor, a lot of these folks don't necessarily feel compelled to give multiple times a year because they already have their monthly gift set up. So what's important to start think about from a communication and a messaging standpoint is you may not want to include your monthly donors in all of your solicitation emails that go out for the rest of the year. But also it's important to think about how you do communicate with them. Do you share an impact update? Do you ask them at key times during the year? And this is something, again, that we'll talk about specific to monthly donors in the second webinar. But really important to think about how can you take the findings and the knowledge you've gained and make them into action-oriented items. There's also ways then that now you have your segmentation set up in the back end, you can start to create some of the personalized messaging based on their needs, their goals, their challenges. And it'll be important to think about there's opportunities and ways in which you don't have to write 7 versions of one email, but there are little ways in which you can personalize an email, such as acknowledging someone's last gift. So acknowledging the fact that as an organization, that this person is an existing donor is a great way to continue to build the relationship, because the donor may not feel like you as an organization have this information, but then they start to feel special when they know, oh, you gave a gift 3 months ago, we're reaching out to you, but it's thoughtful. And also ensure that you continue to evaluate your data and watch your performance. The goal is to continue to adapt and evolve based on what you're seeing from a performance standpoint. So if you're seeing things work really well, you want to continue on. If you're seeing certain messages work really well for certain segments, those are things you'll want to think about adapting more of in your communications. So this is an example of a segmentation strategy. They've got 5 different types of segments at this organization, and they're approaching a community impact fund campaign, which is a very big campaign for them every single year. What's really important here is to think about how the organization is communicating with these 5 different segments as part of this one campaign. And so the goal really is to think about the example here is that sustainers and high dollar donors received a significantly slimmed down version of the campaign, but current donors received all emails. Now that once you have the information and you're actually able to create some action-oriented items on your end, you can start to think about what it looks like when you're getting into specific for campaigns. Colorado Gives Day is a big campaign. So you want to think about how are you encouraging folks to participate? What does the cadence of the emails look like for these folks? And then who are folks that you want to reach out to with every communication? Who are folks that you may want to take out from 1 or 2 communications because you know that they already give such a high amount or recurring amount to your organization? So you want to be able to ensure that they're not necessarily feeling fatigued, because we don't want them to do the unsubscribe from your organization, which could be definitely kind of a negative thing.
Hey, Allie, could I ask a quick question that I get a lot?
Of course, yeah.
So for Colorado Gives Day, the timeline is November 1st for early gifts, and then of course, December 5th for the big 24-hour event. This is also a year-round platform, so that's something to consider. But from your perspective, what is the cadence or timeline? When should folks start introducing the idea, I guess, of Colorado Gives? I always advise, September, October is when you're starting to warm people up, maybe having them engage with other campaigns you're running on Colorado Gives prior to the big day. So I just wondered, do you have any advice for what that might look like?
Definitely. The lead up is important. You want to start to build awareness, especially for a day like this. It's important. It's big. You want to start to use milestones. We're 2 months out, we're 1 month out, starting to really tease folks about the upcoming day, the engagement that we're looking from them, getting them excited about it, showcasing early on. You don't want to, if you're a month out and you want to start to build awareness, you don't want to solicit someone for a gift because you'll start asking for early gifts starting November. But think about ways that you can get folks excited about the day. You can start to create a hashtag, use the Colorado Gives Day hashtag on social media. Share your why, share what's important, ask your family and friends to start getting excited for the day and get involved. You can think about being able to start those conversations early. A month to 2 months is great. And as Jordan mentioned, if you have a campaign in the fall time, say September is start of fall is important campaign time for you. You can include an insert in a direct mail appeal, or you can include a little banner at the bottom of your campaign email, starting to build awareness about the upcoming Colorado Gives Day campaign. And then really once November hits, you want to start thinking about who are we talking to and asking for those early gifts. Do you want to ask everyone for early gifts, or do you really want to start to build this slow momentum? And think about varying the messaging is really important. So you don't want to send 5 emails during the month of November that all ask someone to make an early gift in a very hard way. Like, this is what you want to do and make a gift. But you can start to think about sharing stories of impact from your organization. I see a lot of organizations and a lot of audiences that have expressed their desire to see the personal touch that an organization has on an individual or beyond being really effective. A lot of audiences want that information so that they feel like the money that they're giving to your organization is actually making a difference. And so being able to start to share some of those stories of impact, say through a campaign lead up, is a great way to encourage folks to feel, really moved to make a gift, and ultimately can result in someone feeling compelled to make a larger gift as well. And so this is an ultimately continued example of the campaign segmentation adapted. So you're thinking about, and this is a great way to outline some of your key emails for an upcoming campaign. So this will be shared out and feel free to use it moving forward. But as you're starting to plan your campaign and the key messages, you want to ensure they're varied. And that's what's really important. And you also want to ensure, how are the folks that you're identifying, and to receive a more slimmed down version of the campaign, what does that journey to ultimately conversion, because that's the goal, look like for them? So you'll see here, there's a variation of messages. There's personal stories, there's an e-newsletter, but it includes a donation box to make a gift. There's a kind of urgent message at the end. The month is running out. And so that's other types of messaging that you can use for Colorado Gives Day. It's beautiful to have a deadline for a campaign because it really helps create the sense of urgency and asks your constituents to engage now. And this is an example of actually how you can start to adapt some personalized messaging. It's not the entire email. Like you said, you don't have to go create 7 versions of one email, but there's an opportunity to use within your platforms as well. And thinking about how to personalize the messaging is critical. And as Jordan mentioned, the Colorado Gives actually allows you to identify last gift in the platform. So if you're deploying email, you can create an option for those folks who have given to recognize the fact that they made their last gift just a few months ago, but hey, we're leading up. And so let's take your last gift and double it now. And so this is a great option for Colorado Gives Day, is to think about asking folks to give more. Not everyone, but again, thinking about your segmentation and how these folks have had a relationship with your organization provides the opportunity to start to think about how much you're wanting someone to feel compelled to give. Do you want them to give the same? Do you want them to give double? And how can you craft and create personalized messaging so that individual ultimately feels compelled to give again? The goal is really to take what you know about your audiences, take those into the work that you're doing on a daily basis to make your lives easier. That's really what the goal is here. We don't want folks to feel like this is an extra step along the process or a headache or a hassle. It's really how to use the information you have about the individuals who are connected to your organization to your benefit to make the strategic planning process a lot smoother and ultimately see the goal in conversion and more gifts for your organization.
You mind if I interject something?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for this. I think I want to just highlight exactly what you said. That was a little bit of a revelation for me as well. I think oftentimes we are talking about lapsed donors and how to get them back and how to engage new donors without celebrating the folks that are actually giving and potentially asking them to upgrade or increase their gift for Colorado Gives Day. Or, keep in mind that those early givers, you have that donation information in real time. You have their donor data. And so maybe a secondary ask is, hey, thank you for this $50 gift. Do you want to share your story and raise more funds for me as a fundraiser? So there's easy ways for them to create a fundraiser page. And so just thinking through some creative ways that you can engage and celebrate those folks that are taking action, in addition to, of course, worrying about and focusing on the folks that aren't taking action or who you haven't engaged yet. So that was a revelation for me. So just wanted to highlight that for Colorado Gives Day.
I think that's important. Peer-to-peer fundraising is a great opportunity to ask your donors to continue on, but you're not asking them to dig into their wallets again and give another gift. You're asking them to engage their network. And that goes back to the slide where we talk about who are your target audiences? Who are you talking to? And how can you better reach additional folks knowing you've got a great subset of core folks that are primed, they always give, but how can you take it a step further? Ask them to set up a peer-to-peer fundraiser and encourage their family and their friends to join in supporting your mission. Is a great way to start to think about keeping folks engaged, but not soliciting them for more dollars in a very short, specific time, such as the Colorado Gives Day campaign. Let's look at Amanda's question. Most of our active and highest donors are older, so we can't always count on their funds. The younger demographics don't seem as willing or able to give as much financially. How can we cultivate them as donors if they don't have the same means? That's a really great question. And I think also shows you already have such wonderful information about your donors. So you see your active and your highest donors, they're older. So right, they may feel like they give their one gift a year and they're good, but they still important to share with them the impact throughout the year. That's important. And you also recognize the fact that these folks aren't primed to give again. So you don't necessarily want to keep asking them again and again throughout the year to make another gift. Your younger demographic, on the other hand, may not have the same wealth capacity, and that's okay. But being able to recognize and start to tailor your asks and think about also customizing your donation form for a campaign. If you're sending it out to folks who don't have the same capacity, you can make the asks smaller. If you know that you have a subset of folks who only give maximum about $200, how can you create customized donation strings for them so that they don't feel overwhelmed when they open a donation form and it's set to $1,000 and they know that's beyond their capacity. So you may have them just abandon the form. Thinking about lower asks based on the segmentation that you've done is important. And also thinking about the messaging, Amanda, I think is really critical here. If they don't just necessarily feel compelled to give a gift after one email, that's normal. It actually takes a few touch points for individuals to feel compelled to give. But what you can do is think about ways to make it easier for them to give So if you know that they just want to give a gift and don't necessarily want a very, very long verbose email, you can start to adjust your messaging to it. If you also can think about ways to demonstrate impact, a lot of folks may want to give because they feel like they know where their gift is going before they actually make the gift. So demonstrate impact or ask them to get engaged in other ways. Continue to build the relationship and the affinity with them will ultimately have them feel primed and ready to give a gift. That's great feedback, Nicole. Younger demographics are more on board with monthly giving, smaller but monthly. I completely agree with that. That's something that we'll talk about in our next webinar as well. But a lot of the younger folks in the younger demographic are looking for simplified ways. So if they know they have an affinity to your organization and they sign up for a monthly gift, they feel that they've done exactly and given exactly at the capacity they can for the year, and they don't necessarily want to be asked again. So taking that into account, they're giving a small $10 gift every single month. They're signed up as a sustainer, but they're not then necessarily receiving other hard solicitation asks during the year. So thinking about how to simplify some of the work for them in terms of the request or the ask to get them to convert is really important. I wanted to talk a little bit about a number of the resources provided by Colorado Gives. I know Jordan has dropped in additional ones in the chat, which are all fantastic. The goal is to make this easier for you. Take the information you've gained, adapt it to what works for you at your size, but also there's resources to help you. So Colorado Gives has a number of different resources. So they have a donation widget, which you can embed a donation button on any website. The checkout flow, customize the donation process for your donors. That goes back to what we've talked about. If you know that they're having a challenge and there's a barrier to give because of something that just may seem like an extra step, being able to customize that for them as they're working to give a gift will help, kind of increase the amount of dollars coming into your organization. Exactly as we just talked about peer-to-peer. So Colorado Gives has a fundraiser template that can help you reach new audiences. And that goes back to what we were talking about. If in 1 month span of a Colorado Gives Day campaign, you have someone make an early gift, you don't want to forget about them. You can continue the conversation and ask them to continue the conversation. And they can do that by learning about peer-to-peer fundraising. And as we talked about looking at the data, Colorado Gives has a wonderful donor retention report, which talks and really gets into specific data around retention, how to retain and grow your donor base. So it's important to think about, and this is actually an example of the retention report. You've got information here at your fingertips, how to utilize it, how to be able to take this so that you have donors continue to donate. You can look at how much they've given. As we talked about, the last amount. So Amy gave her last gift on April 1st of $100. How can we now use that in our Colorado Gives Day campaign to recognize the fact that Amy is a donor to our organization, and now we want to have her give more? How can we make a nod to that in some personalized communications? I think what's also important to mention is 75% of donors keep their plan in place for 6 months, and many continue to give for years. So being able to have the understanding of your audience will help you increase your retention rates because they're starting to get the information that they want. And that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the slide. As we talked and started to touch about recurring donors give about 42% more per year and up to 440% more over a lifetime. Thinking about simplifying the ways to give. If you know folks are interested in helping your organization financially, but just want to give and set it and forget it, essentially, there's a great way to think about that, maximizing dollars for your organization. And we are going to talk about how to build a strong sustainer program on August 24th in the next webinar, which we're really excited about. So I encourage you to sign up because sustainers are really valuable for an organization. And again, there's no organization too big or too small to be able to start to think about who these folks are and how to reach them. And overall, a couple key takeaways. Understanding your audience is critical for success. As we talked about, no organization is too small or too specific to learn more about their audience. Gather the information that will help you be more successful in your seat. Depending on the size and sector of your organization, you can start to adapt the activities for your team. You don't have to go and start out with 5 different things. You can choose one. But once you do start to give your target audience what they want, they are ultimately more inclined to engage because they feel like they're being heard. You can find ways to translate your learnings into actionable steps for your organization. As we talked about, utilizing the platform to help you create customized messaging just in the smallest ways can make a big difference for your donors. And ultimately, continue to evaluate your data and analyze your performance. Use the resources that are available. Use the resources from Colorado Gives. This will all help you ultimately be successful in the long run. Investing in your audience is really important to be able to achieve success. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd love to open it up for any more questions and answers that we may have before we wrap it up. So please feel free to ask away.
All right, looks like you solved every marketing problem for every nonprofit.
Well,
Allie,
thank
this
you,
was
everyone.
wonderful. This was such a great webinar. And folks, as you know, this is webinar 1 of a 3-part series. So we're going to build on exactly what we talked about today, next month and the following month. So please make sure to register for those webinars. Allie, it's been so wonderful to work with you and to bring your expertise to our nonprofit audience. So thank you to you and to Firefly Partners.
Thank you all, and thank you all for participating, and I hope to see you in the next webinar.
All right, folks, have a great day.
Take care.